Welcome to the Milk Bottle E-Commerce Show, brought to you by Milk Bottle Labs, one of the world's top-rated accredited Shopify e-commerce experts. Founder Keith Matthews interviews e-commerce professionals, app developers, and entrepreneurs to share as much digital knowledge and e-commerce tips and tricks as possible. This podcast is kindly supported by our go-to e-commerce tools. Rewind.io, the leading backup solution for Shopify, BigCommerce, Trello, and more. Let's just say it's the cheapest insurance policy you'll ever get for your Shopify store and all your valuable data. Simply go to rewind.io/milk bottle to get your first month for free. We just love Klaviyo, our preferred automated email solution we use in every store build. No wonder it's trusted by over 65,000 ambitious growing brands worldwide. Find out more on klaviyo.com/milk bottle. Looking for easy accounting for e-commerce? Cinder can relieve you from manual data entry and automatically generate an accurate P&L report, balance sheet, and inventory management for your business needs. A few clicks and you'll get access to the key metrics to find the hidden streams of income for your business. Use a coupon code EasyBooks for up to 40% off. Check out the show notes for further details.
Hey folks, welcome back. For episode 63, I'm delighted to welcome Robin H. Smith, who is the founder of VL OMNI. Robin has 28 years of experience in supply chain and data integration, and he is the co-founder and CEO. VL OMNI is a serverless microservices iPaaS platform that is both elastic and scalable to the demands of scaling e-commerce and multi-channel merchants. VL OMNI solves a major integration problem for scaling Shopify users that are selling across multiple platforms and utilizing data. And I have to say, I really enjoyed this conversation. Robin has made data very, very attractive to talk about. Robin H. Smith, how are you?
I'm very good, Keith. We're talking across the pond here. You're in Ireland and I'm in Canada, and kindred spirits, I see. So
Yes, really nice to talk to you. I have heard you on a few interviews many, many times, Robin, and all I will say is the voice of experience. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, I've been around the block a few times. Yeah, I have the battle scars to prove it.
That's good. Well, look, as I say, really, really nice to have you on the podcast. Let's kick off and explain to the listeners exactly what VL OMNI does.
VL OMNI is a managed iPaaS. The term iPaaS was coined by Gartner. It's integration platform as a service. One of our partners actually recoined it and said the best way to describe you is an integration partner as a service, as opposed to a platform, because we are a managed service. We come out of bricks and mortar retail, so we have a very deep experience with complex retail supply chains, both in North America as well as in the UK. And we've as retail has changed, we've also changed. We've been around for 28 years. We do EDI, although that is a declining technology, certainly in North America, in the retail space. It's not in other verticals. And today we do not only EDI, but we integrate to marketplaces like Amazon and eBay and e-commerce platforms. And of course, Shopify holding the majority share worldwide after WooCommerce. We do a tremendous amount of Shopify. We integrate into the back-end systems. So our philosophy is really about aligning brand strategy with data delivery, so that what you're trying to execute from a customer service perspective and a customer experience perspective, we articulate with the data that comes in and out of the ERP.
Just on that, trying to discuss data with a lot of brands is a difficult one because a lot of them don't get it. So at what stage in the life cycle of a business are you having that discussion? Are you discussing it with very clever funded startups, or are you discussing that with mature businesses? Because you mentioned over nearly 30 years experience. That means you guys have been working with data when it was very, very unattractive, but that's changed lately.
Yeah, I would say both, actually. It depends on where in the journey the business is. The more sophisticated the business, the dirtier we find the data, simply because there's years of data entry that either hasn't been standardized or there's been different orientations imposed. With very fast growing companies, data is usually not so much dirty, it's the lack of, and it's because they don't have the proper systems in place, or they haven't scaled yet to put the systems in place. So there's things that they're trying to achieve that, in fact, the only way you can do it is with manual entry. So I would say it's a combination of both, but 99% of our support is bad data. It's once the tech stuff is done and the business issues are looked after and dealt with, it's crappy data, and data is, the old adage, garbage in, garbage out.
You just took the words out of my mouth. Yeah. It's quite amazing the amount of added effort that it takes in a migration to Shopify as a result of poor data.
It's huge.
It's massive. So my next question to you then is, do you work with clients to clean the data, or do you only work with clients with fresh data or sanitized data?
Well, one of the things with integration is that you're data agnostic in the sense that you're a data movement vehicle. So it's really up to the company that is validating the data, and that's the user, to clean that. We don't know the data, but we're not intimate with the data, but we know where the data issues are. And I can give you some examples. We've got a customer here that's doing B2B e-commerce on Shopify. They are selling dental supplies to dentists all over Canada. And one of the things that they want to do is they want to integrate more of their B2B functionality with their ERP, and they want to put in a proper CRM. Well, the business has been around a long time, 15, 16 years. And one of the things that's come out is that the data in their ERP has been haphazardly put in. So you've got things like information in address fields that really should be in a notes field or something, things of that nature, that if you just simply do the integration, you move the data as is, you actually make the problem worse. So you really need to step back, and this speaks really to much more mature companies that are dipping their toe into e-commerce, whether they're B2B or direct to consumer. It's the same problem. The lack of structure around your data entry, the more problems you're going to have in the integration. Things as simple as aligning ship methods between the front end and the ERP, tax authorities. In Canada and the UK, tax authorities are not such a big deal, but when you get into the US, tax authorities are a massive issue. Where's the point of truth? What is going to be the point of truth for the data? And that cascades down to product. Product is foundational across any integration because that's what people order. So if the product data is inconsistent or it doesn't line up, you're going to have all sorts of issues.
But Robin, you've just mentioned inaccurate data from a kind of a customer CRM point of view. But product data, is it simplistic to say that at least product data can be cleaned quickly or sit in a PIM, whereas the other data is like if somebody puts in the wrong postcode for a customer, or if somebody puts in the wrong 7 digits out of a cell number instead of 8, that's pretty much unfixable. So even with, I suppose, getting into the granular detail, have you ever had experience of a customer where their data, a particular area of their data was so bad that you actually said, hold on here, guys, there's actually no point in integrating?
Yeah, we have actually. And I think just to step back to your question around PIMs and product and so on and so forth, I think you have to look at where your central point of truth is for the data that you want to maintain, because there can be multiple central points of truth. What we see today in e-commerce is basically two models. We see a model that is ERP-centric, where everything is in and out of the ERP. And then we see this hybrid model that we're seeing more and more. And that hybrid model is, I do some things in my ERP and I do some things in Shopify. And, things like order cancellations, for example, or line item cancellations, you start to do that in Shopify, but you want that reflected in your ERP. You're now very much changing the orientation of how the integration works. So I think that companies need to step back and look at how they're doing. And doing things. And this is an area where we see a lot of disconnect, is that people don't, when they're starting to look at the integration, they don't look at where things are actually getting done. So that's the first thing. Now, to come to your question around, have we had projects put on hold because of data? Yeah, absolutely. We have a number of them. We've had them in the past. We have them right now, where a company can't align the SKU in the ERP with what's in Shopify because they were done independently of each other. And the task of figuring out the alignment is so enormous, and the bigger the data points in terms of the bigger the catalog, then that's an issue. So yes, it can most certainly have an effect on the ability to do things.
So, Robin, what's your view then on Shopify stores that are adding, like if we take the majority of Shopify stores, for example, that don't have a major ERP integration, the dashboards that they would log into would be more than likely the warehouse management system dashboard, the Shopify dashboard, or their MailChimp dashboard, or their Klaviyo dashboard. But what happens, is it a risk when a store adds 30 or 40 different apps? Is that a data risk? And what I would say is there any way that you guys can assist in that or help that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in terms of adding functionality into a store. Obviously, you're going to affect the performance of the store the more add-ins that you've got, and that's that's a common issue. But I think that there's a certain segment of the Shopify population that has taken Shopify, and we saw this in the Magento world in 2011 and 2012, 2013, when Magento tried to become more ERP-like. We see the same thing in the Shopify world, is that people don't have the correct tech to scale. So they're trying to do things in Shopify that Shopify was never built for. And sometimes people will add in a plugin that affects some other plugin.
Yeah.
And there's lots of examples out there. One of the areas that we're starting to see in North America right now is companies they started out as a pure play e-commerce solution. They're selling DTC, and now some of the majors, the high street guys, are looking at them and saying, "Hey, I really like your product." And these companies want to do all their EDI in and out of Shopify. Well, Shopify doesn't have an accounting system.
Yeah.
You can't do order confirmations out of Shopify. You can't do advanced shipment notices, pick and pack, and labeling out of Shopify.
So Shopify was a great platform when they were starting, but then all of a sudden, when it gets complex, they blame Shopify. The interesting thing about that point that you just made there is, like, I always say this to people: there's no such thing as the perfect platform, but if you can get a platform for, $25,000 a year that can bring you to 50 or 60 or 100 million, well, if you have to move platforms after that time, well, then go for it. Don't criticize the platform.
No, it's so true. But I guess, and it speaks to the simplicity that Shopify promotes, is that, you have these conversations and people say, well, yeah, well, there's got to be a plugin for this. Well, no, it's a lot more complicated than just a plugin in a plugin.
It's the same challenge that we get confronted with. You can build it yourself. Well, if it was so simple to build yourself, everybody would be doing it. Robin, just give me 1 second and we will just take a listen to our sponsors. Rewind.io is the leading backup solution for your Shopify store. Did you know that there's no way of recovering lost data? If your store is gaining traction, app developers or multiple staff may enter your store, and there's absolutely no way of fixing human error. Rewind.io allows you to rewind your store back to its original state, so you can reduce your business risk immediately with the Rewind app. It's so easy and is the cheapest and best insurance policy you'll ever need for your Shopify store. Get your first month for free by simply replying to your first email from Rewind and mention this podcast. Now, regular listeners will know I love Klaviyo. It's the single biggest revenue generator I've ever seen across hundreds and hundreds of Shopify stores I've been in. Klaviyo's data-driven marketing automation platform is sophisticated enough to power those legendary campaigns from the big brands you admire, but they make it simple, they make it easy, and they make it fast. To get started with a free trial of Klaviyo, visit klaviyo.com/milkbottle. That's klaviyo.com/milkbottle. Robin, so just, I suppose, direct question then in relation to Shopify. We know data sits in all of these different places. We know that there's good data and there's bad data. We know that customers have multiple options to house data and store data securely. In terms of Shopify and high-performing Shopify brands, how can a managed integration service help a growing brand?
Well, it's a great question. A few years ago, I would have said that we were probably overkill for a lot of companies because they didn't have the level of sophistication. And I think that what's happened since COVID is that we're seeing a level of complexity being introduced into direct-to-consumer e-commerce that is now on par with what we see in bricks and mortar. And what we find is that a lot of companies struggle with strategy around how do they execute. The days of I put up a website and I collect a bunch of plugins and people come and they buy are long gone. And I think we're into this e-com 2.0, and I don't want to use the Shopify 2.0 example, but it's really, there's a level of sophistication not only in the customer journey, but also in the customer expectations that now a lot of these simplistic systems don't function well in. And, you see that, you follow the chat boards, people are saying, well, how do I deal with chargebacks? Is there a plugin to do this specific thing? What we find and where the managed service intersection now becomes very valuable to companies is we can step back and develop strategy with them. How are you going to handle returns? How's that going to intersect with what your customer experience is? And how does that intersect with your financials? Because they're not independent of each other, they're intrinsic. So it's that kind of approach that allows us to work with customers to flush out what do they actually want to do. And more we find is that customers are grappling. They don't know what they want to do. And they look to agencies, they look to tech partners, they get all this mixed messaging around what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. And just being able to step back and articulate a vision and then say, okay, well, here's one way of handling it. Does this fit? Or here's another way, I think. And then layering in the integration. Everybody's approached integration as a technical exercise.
That's a very good point.
But it's actually a technical exercise, and more importantly, it's a business exercise. So I think this is where the managed service element.
So Robin, your point is very valid there. Integration is seen as a technical expense and a bit of a pain, when in actual fact, as you just mentioned, there are returns, multiple locations, or chargebacks. The handling of that will reflect the customer experience and whether they're going to shop with you again. So everything is absolutely linked. So in terms of what your team do you just basically go into a client and take full responsibility of their data? And if they come up with some function that they want, let's say they want to, whatever way, for example, as you mentioned, they want to handle chargebacks, that you take responsibility for all of that as a managed service. Is that summary of what you do?
Basically, what we do is we start with a discovery process of what the customer wants to do. Like what are the current pain points? And we'll go through those pain points and we'll figure out where the overlay and the overlap is with integration. And there are some things that like chargebacks from a credit card company. That's not something that we do because it doesn't intersect with the integration with the back end systems. But it's all part of figuring out what the overall strategy is and where things will touch accounting, where things won't touch accounting. And these are all symptoms of bigger issues that strategy has to be first. And sure, you can move orders, you can create customers, you can do fulfillments. But if you're getting chargebacks because your fulfillments are late or you're missing the window of fulfillments, then that becomes an integration issue. So these are the kinds of areas that we dig into when we figure out, okay, are there things that you can be changing because of data velocity? There's this impression right now in e-commerce that everything has to move very fast. And this idea of things moving fast creates all sorts of collateral effects.
I blame Amazon for that.
To me, it's really appalling to see some sites where tracking information on fulfillments, for example, is generated before the pick and pack is even done. And then they're having to go back and they're having to restructure things.
Yeah.
And so it's things like that. And that's where we step back and we say, okay, let's dissect your processes and let's look at how we can make the integrations better at the same time as addressing the pain points.
So, like, what's the most likely outcome then who choose not to use that service? Is it after a few years building their brand, do they have to start again and it becomes more expensive because the data set is larger? Like, what is the disadvantage to not having that conversation with somebody like you early on in the business cycle?
Well, I think there's multiple things. I think one is that you need to understand where you fit. Because there's different approaches to integration. There's the plug and play solution that's really, at the end of the day, that's built for the lowest common denominator. And in the case of some ERPs, it fits you into a model. And if your business processes don't fit that model, then you have to change. You may not want to change, or if you do change, it may change the way your whole customer experience works. So do you fit into that? Then there's the idea that I'm gonna hire some custom programmer to develop the thing, and that we see in organizations that don't have strategy, where everything is driven by the CFO, and there's a cost sensitivity around things. The problem with that approach is that your integration is a snapshot in time, and it doesn't evolve. It doesn't evolve as the business evolves. And the reality is that there's no business that's static. Businesses are changing constantly. And if your integrations don't have the ability to change with the way you do business, then you're behind the eight ball. And the longer that goes on, the integrations become more and more dated and their best before date expires. The other thing we see with that approach is that the custom coded stuff or the outsourcing to Southeast Asia or places like that, I mean, you get the documentation. What happens when you part ways with a thing? Nobody knows. All your people turn over. You have no idea what's going on. Nobody knows how it works.
And there's no documents, Robin.
And there's no document. So, whereas if you want to evolve a business, then you've got to form partnerships with companies that will help you evolve. And I think that's the approach that we've taken. It comes from our EDI days. But I think at each point, companies need to step back and think about their strategy. Where are they going? Why are they doing the things that they're doing? Is it because they've always done it that way and nobody ever thought about doing it differently? My job in the sales cycle and when we engage with customers is to challenge customers. Because if we just provide and apply with what they want to do, then we're not going to give them the kinds of things or we're not going to allow them to grow. Sorry, you're just hearing my old cat who's 20 years old. He's an old man.
That's okay. Cats are allowed at the podcast, Robin. I wouldn't worry about that. So but in listening to you though, Robin, is there obviously as a business you have a customer fit, okay? Yes. But is it wrong or correct to say that the types of businesses that would be looking strategically at their use of data in 5 or 10 years' time are well-funded startups, or there's D2C brands that are on the Shopify platform that are completely using Shopify for everything, that are going from zero to millions in very short periods of time. So the chances are they're more worried about the logo and their Instagram followers than they would be where their data is being housed or whether the data flow is accurate or not.
Yeah.
Is it naive of me to suggest then that clients of yours that are having those conversations, a year out from when they launch, are they few and far between, or is it something that is actually front and center nowadays?
It's becoming front and center. It was in the past there was less emphasis on back end operations. And there's probably, as you said earlier, there's probably about 50% of Shopify Plus sites that are using a very simplistic tech stack, which works.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it, but they will, at a certain point, reach a stage where they have to rethink and revamp, and that's where somebody like us comes in. For those that are more established businesses, the whole strategy around getting into doing this stuff and fitting it into existing processes is where our sweet spot is. we tend to work with companies that are more multi-channel. They've got multiple channels that they sell through. There's a certain level of sophistication in the business. They've been around. They're not typically startups. Startups, even though they're well funded, we find it's always how can I do it quickly to achieve what I want to achieve?
Yeah.
As opposed to I have a strategy
and do it properly. And does your area of expertise then feed into headless e-commerce?
Absolutely.
I personally believe that headless is only for a very small amount of people, and I think sometimes it's hyped up in the e-commerce space at the moment. For example, SMS. People are talking about SMS as if it was only invented yesterday. I get amazed at that sometimes. It's been around a long, long time. But headless doesn't have. I wouldn't compare the two, but certainly people do buzz off headless when I kind of go sometimes. Gosh.
Oh no, I completely agree. Headless to me is for the 1%. You got to have deep pockets. You've got to have strategy. If you don't have strategy, headless is. There's a lot of very simplistic marketing right now around speed in headless, and everybody's trying to achieve velocity, and that's great. But
I like that word, velocity.
Yeah, it's sort of this nirvana that the faster things go, the better your customer experience. Well, yeah, the faster things go, but the more you have time to screw things up, and that doesn't necessarily bode well for your customer experience.
Well, in the Shopify community, Shopify have kind of added fuel to the fire there by adding the store speed inside the dashboard.
Of course.
I spent many years in telecoms, and the truth is that your store would want to be very, very slow for somebody not to continue through a Shopify checkout. And at the end of the day, the speed of the store is also a reflection on the speed of the data and the mobile network that the mobile device is sitting on. So, and it's never taken into account. It just, it absolutely amazes me. Robin, I suppose just to finish, is there a trend? I know that's a very, very large question, but in the last few years, things have accelerated. The markets, DTC brands, as we've both discussed, have gone, some of them can go from 0 to 1 million very, very quickly. But is there a trend that you see in the last few years when it comes to how people treat data on their e-commerce store? There doesn't have to be now.
The trend is, the trend hasn't changed. It's people don't respect data. I mean, if you think about it, and I always go back to one of the former heads of IBM who said, the currency of the digital world is the quality of your data. And if your data quality is poor, then your currency is poor.
Yeah, then you have nothing.
Yeah. And you scramble and you do things manually. You do workarounds and so on and so forth. There was a very interesting study done in the UK for Tesco. This is many years ago on the break-even point around data integrity and order management. And it's about 20 to 25 orders a day, at which point that people start to introduce errors into the orders if they're doing things manually. So if you extrapolate that out on a high volume site where people are supplementing data because their systems don't have it, I mean, the potential for error is huge, is absolutely huge. Systems that are misconfigured give you erroneous information. Like if you're not enforcing postal codes, I mean, that was something that you brought up earlier. Yeah. Like if you're not enforcing postal code rigidity in Shopify, in your theme, that's got all sorts of downstream effects on your shipping, on your, you ship to the wrong address, or FedEx charges you $25 to fix the address. I mean, that costs the business money.
Yeah. That was a good answer to the question, actually. Is there any trends? No.
No, I wouldn't say that there are trends. I mean, there's a lot of hype cycles that are out there. You bring up SMS. SMS has been around I worked in telecoms prior to starting the business too. Yeah. And I used to sell billing systems. I used to work in East Africa, in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania.
Well, there's a data set that was never correct. Telecoms billing engines were never correct.
Ever. But what was interesting is that the M-Pesa system in Kenya for payments, for mobile payments, was built on SMS. And that's been around. M-Pesa has been around for 30 years.
I've heard you, Robin, before talk about the Gartner hype cycle.
Yes.
Can you explain to the listeners what that is?
So the Gartner hype cycle is the cycle that technology adoption goes through. So it starts with a very, very high curve. It peaks, and then it starts to go down, and then it sort of goes up again, and then it fizzles out. And that early bubble is the early adopters. So the ones that are really on the bleeding edge, they're the rah guys. And then it sort of as it goes down, it becomes universally embraced. And then you've got a change in the process, and again, you got this other hype cycle, and then it sort of flatlines. If you Google Gartner hype cycle, you'll see all the, it's a well documented term, and it's one where you can do the hype cycle on various technologies and see what's adopted. Like, right now, what I would say is in the Gartner hype cycle in e-commerce is VR. I mean, everybody's been talking about VR, about how it's great. Well, guess what? 20% of the population can't see in 3D. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
VR to me is absolutely useless in e-commerce. Anybody who has a visual impairment, 3D and VR is completely useless.
It certainly, there is a logic. I wasn't aware of that percentage actually, but there is a logic in having it. But all of these technologies only make sense when they're relatively economical to adopt, and they fit in, as you mentioned earlier on, with your tech stack. Now I know that Shopify has been working on that. So that's interesting. We'll put the reference to the Gartner hype cycle in the show notes. Robin, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I get the impression that I would talk to you for a lot longer. You make data and integration sound so interesting. So really appreciate your time.
Well, and it's not a very sexy topic to begin with. It's one of those things. I always say to people, if you can sell integration, you can sell anything. But thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Robin.
Thanks for listening. All of our episodes are available on Spotify, iTunes, and Google Podcasts. A special note of appreciation goes to our sponsors, Rewind.io, the leading backup solution for Shopify and BigCommerce store owners. Get your first month free by responding to your welcome email once you sign up for your free trial on Rewind.io. Cinder is worth considering for your e-commerce accounting and reporting needs. Use a coupon code EasyBooks for up to 40% off. Klaviyo, which helps e-commerce brands easily create personalized, multi-channel marketing campaigns using your most powerful asset, your customer data. To get started with a free trial of Klaviyo, visit klaviyo.com/milkbottle. That's KLAVIYO.com/milkbottle. If you're a Shopify user with an exciting story to tell, reach out to the team on podcast@milkbottlelabs.com. Until next time, take care.